9 Footprints in the Snow, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. There is a photograph from February 1, 1959. It shows 9 young people skiing across the snowy slopes of the Ural Mountains in Soviet Russia. They are smiling, bundled in winter gear, full of life and adventure. It is the last photograph ever taken of them alive. Within hours, something would drive them to cut their way out of their tent and run barefoot into the frozen darkness. 9 experienced hikers would die on a mountain the indigenous Mansi people called Kholat Syakhl, Death Mountain. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, a mystery that has endured for over 6 decades. A case where the Soviet authorities concluded that the hikers died from a compelling natural force, then sealed the files and refused to speak of it again. A case where the injuries found on some of the bodies were compared to the force of a high-speed car crash, yet there were no external wounds. Where one young woman was found with her tongue removed and her eyes missing. Where footprints led away from the tent in a single orderly line, then scattered and disappeared into the wilderness. What happened on Death Mountain? The answer depends on who you ask. Avalanche? Secret military testing? Radiation? Indigenous attack? Infrasound-induced panic? Even theories involving Yetis and extraterrestrials have been proposed. But the facts, the documented, verified facts, are strange enough without embellishment. January 23, 1959, 10 members of the Ural Polytechnical Institute gathered to begin a skiing expedition across the northern Urals. The goal was to reach Mount Otertin, a journey of approximately 190 miles through some of the most remote and dangerous terrain in the Soviet Union. In winter, this route was classified as Category 3, the highest difficulty level. Temperatures could drop to -40 degrees Celsius. Storms could arrive with little warning. But all 10 participants were experienced hikers, most with Grade 2 certifications, and they sought to earn their Grade 3 by completing this trek. The leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student. With him were 7 other students and 1 sports instructor, all in their early 20s except for Semyon Zolotaryov, who was 38. 2 of the hikers were women, Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, and Lyudmila Dubinina, 20. They carried cameras, diaries, food supplies, warm clothing, and a specially modified tent that could accommodate the entire group. On January 28, 5 days into the journey, one member of the group, Yuri Yudin, turned back due to severe joint pain and sciatica. He said goodbye to his friends and returned alone. He would be the only survivor. Years later, he would say that if he could ask God one question, it would be, "What happened to my friends that night?" The remaining 9 continued toward Mount Otertin. They kept detailed diaries and took photographs documenting their progress. The entries are mundane, cheerful. They complain about the cold and joke about their rations. On the evening of February 1, they set up camp on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl, about 300 meters below the summit. The slope was not steep, approximately 30 degrees. They cut a platform into the snow to create a level surface for their tent. This would prove significant later. That is the last day they made diary entries, the last day they took photographs that would be developed. Igor Dyatlov had told his sports club they would send a telegram upon their return, expected around February 12th. When the date came and went with no word, the club initially was not concerned. Another hiking group had reported severe storms in the area. It was assumed the Dyatlov group was simply delayed, waiting out bad weather in safety. But by February 20, when still no telegram had arrived, search parties were organized. On February 26th, the search team found the tent. What they discovered there defied immediate explanation. The tent was still standing, but partially collapsed under snow. It had been cut open from the inside, long slashes through the fabric, made by knives wielded by people desperate to escape. But escape from what? Inside the tent, everything remained: warm coats, boots, supplies, food, even a flask of vodka, 9 pairs of shoes. If the hikers had fled the tent voluntarily, why would they leave behind the very items essential for survival in sub-zero temperatures? Outside, the searchers found footprints, 8 or 9 sets, single file, leading away from the tent toward the tree line almost a mile distant. Some prints were made by bare feet, others showed only socks or a single boot. The tracks were calm, orderly, not the chaotic scatter of people in panic. They walked in a line, one behind the other, into the forest below. The first 2 bodies were found that same day at the edge of the tree line, beneath a large cedar tree. Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonischenko, both in their early 20s, were found beside the remains of a small fire. They were barely clothed, wearing only underwear and torn pieces of clothing. Doroshenko had burns on his hands and feet. One of his hands showed severe burns consistent with prolonged contact with fire. Krivonischenko had bitten off a piece of his own knuckle, perhaps to stay awake or to stifle a cry. The branches on the cedar tree were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone had climbed it, perhaps trying to see back to the camp. Over the next few days, 3 more bodies were found between the cedar tree and the tent: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin, all found at intervals of several hundred meters, positioned as if they had been trying to return to the tent. Slobodin had a small skull fracture, though the medical examiner concluded he died of hypothermia, not from the head injury. All 3 were more clothed than the first 2, but inadequately dressed for the conditions. All had died of hypothermia. 5 bodies, 4 still missing. The search continued. The snow began to melt in May. On May 4th, a Mansi hunter noticed cut branches forming a trail in the forest. Following it, search dogs discovered something 75 meters from the cedar tree, in a ravine beneath 4 meters of snow. It was a makeshift shelter, a den dug into the snow and lined with cut cedar branches. Inside were the last 4 bodies. These bodies told a different story.
Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had massive skull fractures. Semyon Zolotaryev had severe chest trauma, multiple broken ribs, and internal hemorrhaging. Lyudmila Dubinina had even worse injuries: 4 ribs broken on the right side, 7 on the left, massive internal bleeding and hemorrhaging in her heart. The force required to cause these injuries, the medical examiner stated, was comparable to a high-speed car crash. Yet there were no corresponding external wounds, no bruises, no broken skin, just catastrophic internal damage. And there were other details, more disturbing. Dubinina was found face down in a stream, her mouth open. She was missing her tongue, her eyes, and portions of her lips and facial tissue. Zolotaryev was also missing his eyes. Alexander Kolovatov was missing his eyebrows. The medical examiner attributed these to post-mortem decomposition and animal scavenging, as the bodies had been in running water for 3 months. But some have questioned this explanation, particularly regarding the tongue, because Dubinina's stomach contained approximately 100 grams of coagulated blood, suggesting her heart had been beating when the tongue was removed. The 4 in the ravine had done everything they could to survive. They had built a den, they had gathered branches for insulation, they had taken clothing from those who died first. Dubinina wore Krivonischenko's burned trousers. Zolotaryev wore Dubinina's fur coat and hat. They had tried to preserve warmth, to wait for rescue, to stay alive. It had not been enough. One final detail complicated the case further. Some items of clothing from the bodies tested positive for radiation, not high levels, but measurable contamination. Two of the hikers, Krivonishenchenko and Kolivatov, had previously worked at a secret nuclear facility called Chelyabinsk 40, which had experienced a major radioactive leak in 1957, known as the Kishtim disaster. The radiation on the clothes could be explained by their previous work, or it could mean something else. The Soviet investigation lasted 3 months. The lead investigator, Lev Nikitich Ivanov, interviewed witnesses, examined evidence, and tried to make sense of what happened. His conclusion, stated in the official report, was that the hikers died from a compelling natural force. No crime had been committed. No guilty party existed. The case was closed in May 1959, and the files were classified as secret. Decades later, in 1990, Ivanov published an article admitting the investigation team had no rational explanation for the incident. He revealed that after his team reported seeing flying spheres of light in the area, he received direct orders from high-ranking officials to dismiss this claim and not pursue it further. He also stated that he believed some unknown force had killed the hikers, something beyond their understanding. What really happened on Death Mountain? Let us consider what we know for certain. 9 experienced hikers cut their way out of their tent and fled into temperatures cold enough to kill in minutes. They left behind everything they needed to survive. They walked in orderly fashion toward the forest. 2 built a fire and died beside it. 3 tried to return to the tent and froze before reaching it. 4 built a shelter and suffered catastrophic internal injuries before dying. The most recent official explanation offered by Russian authorities in 2020 after reopening the investigation is a delayed slab avalanche. The theory suggests that cutting the tent platform into the slope, combined with wind-driven snow accumulation and unusual topography, caused a small avalanche hours after they made camp. The snowslide struck the tent, causing panic and forcing the hikers to cut their way out and flee. Unable to return to the tent in poor visibility and extreme cold, they froze. The 4 in the ravine were caught in a secondary collapse of their snow den, causing the severe internal injuries. This explanation addresses some questions, but it leaves others unanswered. Why would an avalanche not leave more obvious debris? Why did some hikers climb a tree if they had just escaped an avalanche? Why were the injuries on Dubinina and Zolotaryev so similar in direction and force despite their difference in height and body type? Why did witnesses report seeing spheres of light? Why was there radiation on the clothing? Other theories persist. Some point to secret military testing in the area. Russia was conducting missile launches in February 1959. Some witnesses reported seeing fireballs in the sky around the time of the incident. Could a failed rocket test have released toxic chemicals? Could military personnel have stumbled upon the hikers and killed them to protect secrets? The Soviet government's immediate sealing of the case files does suggest they knew more than they admitted. Some researchers believe infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that can be generated by wind passing over certain terrain features, caused the panic. Infrasound can induce feelings of dread, anxiety, and irrational fear. Could this have driven the hikers from their tent in terror, fleeing from a threat that existed only in their minds? We will likely never know. All the witnesses are dead. The physical evidence that might have solved the case was contaminated, lost, or never properly collected. The Soviet government's secrecy and the decades that passed before files were released have made certainty impossible. What we are left with is the human tragedy. 9 young people full of life and ambition who set out on an adventure and never returned. Families who waited for news that never came. A single survivor, Yuri Yudin, who lived the rest of his life haunted by the question of what happened to his friends that night. He died in 2013, never receiving an answer. The Dyatlov Pass incident endures because it touches something primal in us, the fear of the unknown, the knowledge that even with experience and preparation, nature can overwhelm us, the unsettling possibility that there are forces in the world we do not fully understand, and the simple, terrible fact that sometimes people vanish into the darkness and we never learn why. If this exploration of one of history's most enduring mysteries has stayed with you, I would be grateful if you would take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories waiting in the shadows, more mysteries that refuse to be explained, and I will be here to examine them with the respect and care they deserve. Until next time, may your footprints always lead you safely home.